We are also streaming on Rumble. Rumble has something called a rant. So that's their version of a paid chat. If you send us a Rumble rant, we'll read it on air. And Odyssey has a couple different ways that you can send us a hyper chat using their library cryptocurrency or just regular old money. And that's their version of a paid chat. We'll read that on air. And we are currently streaming on Getter as well. I think this begins the 6th week of our live streaming relationship with Getter, and I think it's going well over there. So those are the nuts and bolts. If you want to have your say, I've given you the ways to do that. Rumble Rant, Odyssey, Hyper Chat. Those are the 2 big ways, and normally Super U, but we just couldn't figure out how to stream there today, but we'll hopefully have that resolved for tomorrow if that's your preferred form of viewing us. Lots of things to talk about. What do you want to start with? You want to start with do you want to start with Will Smith, or should we start with Randy Hillier?
Let's get jiggy with it right off the bat.
Yeah, I think that was the most atrocious thing. I hadn't seen the getting jiggy with it video until like just before we came on air, and I was like, oh, you know, he was contrite in his acceptance speech, but no, they're laughing at us. Why don't you take us through this? Because you pay closer attention to pop culture than I do. I know that for sure, because nobody could pay less attention to pop culture than I do. Yeah. I think the last time I paid attention to Will Smith, Getting Jiggy With It just came out. So that song sounded familiar to me, but why don't you bring us sort of up to speed? And we've got, I think, 3 different clips that we can throw to.
Yeah, we can start pulling those up. But yeah, I want to be clear for everyone out there. I generally cover Christian pastors, persecution, serious political coverage, but I'm also the pop culture junkie. I'm not by any stretch of the imagination. But what we did see last night was absolutely shocking. Here, I think we've got the clip ready to go. We can watch this right away here and then get into it. Yeah.
Smith wins, like, please, Lord. Jada, I love you. G.I. Jane 2, can't wait to see it. All right?
He's laughing there. He's laughing.
Laughing.
That was a nice one. Okay. I'm out here. Uh-oh. Richard. Oh, wow. Wow. Will Smith.
Yeah, we're
he got in one little fight and his mom got scared. She said, "You're moving with your auntie and uncle to Bel-Air." Yeah. So, and then after this, so when people are gauging whether it's a joke or not, the audio is just cut out here. We're not hearing it. But he says basically,
hear it
there's profanity. Yeah. He says, "Keep my wife's name out of your blah, blah, blah mouth."
Out here. Uh-oh.
That's good. Yeah. So this is absolutely shocking. And I want to keep in mind for those people, 10 minutes after this or so, Will Smith went up on stage, won an award, and gave a speech saying that he was put on this earth by God to love people and protect people. Literally 10 minutes. Yeah, I think we have that. If we can go to that too and get the reaction directly.
I just want to point out, though, before we go to that something happened that we didn't see. Because as Chris Rock is telling this joke about Jada Pinkett Smith? Pinkett Smith? I think that's okay. That shows how in tune I am to all of this. But that also means I come in with clear eyes. From what I understand, she's got alopecia, so she's bald, and it's something that she's sort of sensitive about. But she's also kind of become an advocate for acceptance of it. In my brief, like poking around the internet before we came on air, so it's not something that she hides. But Chris Rock made a joke about that because G.I. Jane in that movie, Demi Moore shaves her head.
Yeah.
And so he says, whatever, G.I. Jane 2. Will Smith laughs at that joke.
Oh, yeah.
You can see him openly laughing. Then they go to Chris Rock, and something happens in between with Jada Pinkett Smith and Will, where he goes from laughing to, I'm going to punch this man in the face.
You can already see her starting to death stare. And you look at Will Smith, he's kind of uncomfortably laughing, trying to be a good sport. You can tell he's not really laughing. He's kind of like, ha, 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 ha. He's like, it's a little funny, but my wife's got this thing, so it's not really appropriate. But if you're in the front rows at the Oscars, it's a roast. You have to understand that context. Listen, if Chris Rock or some random person came up to her on the street, and made some comment about her medical condition, and he smacked him in the mouth, that might be a little more understandable. I still don't think violence.
Those arguments.
Yeah,
I'm willing to hear those arguments.
I still don't think violence is the excuse, because ultimately, once you cross that line of decking somebody over a comment, you're kind of the villain in that situation. Will Smith could have come up during his acceptance speech. He could have said something like, that's not appropriate. She has a medical condition. There's 100 things he could have done to make it clear that Chris Rock crossed the line. Yeah.
They slow it right down. So there's a lot of conspiracy theories about whether or not it's real, but somebody slowed it right down, and you can hear the smack and look at his face. The
jiggle, like, well, and the fact is you can tell even without seeing the hit, because I think they tried to edit it and it got out on some networks. His reaction afterwards, like, Chris Rock is a comedic legend, a consummate professional. How he dealt with it was it was well managed, but you could tell he was literally like, what he was trying to like laugh it off. But yeah, what we're seeing here, and it's so sad to see on Twitter, these progressive, peaceful leftists. Jada Pinkett Smith is one of their sort of people, so it's okay to enact violence on their behalf because they're those people. He literally came on afterwards talking about being an advocate and protecting people from his community, BIPOC, whatever terminology you want to use, during his speech. And literally, he just smacked somebody.
She rolls her eyes.
Yeah.
She rolls her eyes. He laughs, and then something happens here.
Yeah. And like, he literally says, "I love you" to start it off. Afterwards, he's like, that was a nice little joke, and he's kind of apologetic. Like, it was so innocuous. And yeah, don't get me wrong, I completely understand the fact that she has this medical condition. Most people in Hollywood are aware of it. Was it inappropriate? And would Will Smith have been entirely justified? And I think the term we're hearing often is chivalric. Was he being chivalric here? Well, there is a place, comfort her, maybe even say something to correct his behavior. But walking up there and assaulting him over something he said, it just crosses a line, plain and simple, particularly in this context.
See, I don't know. Maybe I'm just a little more Western than you. And so I'm willing to hear arguments about somebody smacking somebody else in the mouth because something mean was said about somebody's wife. You know what? You could get me there. My problem is...
At a roast. At like a comedic... roast
at a rodeo,
environment.
At a rodeo?
Exactly. You know? That's why I said if you're on the streets,
that happens all the time.
Yeah, if you're on the streets or at a beer garden or something like that, and you're a random person, you're a celebrity sitting in the front row, and you know Chris Rock is going to roast people in the front. Now, 100%, we can solve the conversation about whether a joke about someone's medical circumstance that they're probably, despite being an advocate for, self sort of conscious about. Yeah, we can have that conversation. We can have a conversation about whether Will Smith was right. Will Smith could have gone up and Kanye Wested it and grabbed the mic and said something, but he immediately escalated to violence, and people were so happy. It's so funny, all this talk out there about toxic masculinity and how bad it is, and then Will Smith assaults a dude for making a joke, and then the liberal progressives who talk about toxic masculinity, a lot of them are celebrating this. If there is such a thing as toxic masculinity, it's attacking somebody physically for making a joke, whether it's appropriate or not. I hate to break it to people out there, but a lot of comedy is sort of dancing on lines of appropriateness and not, and making it okay to assault someone, particularly a comedian. It's one of the last holy grails, one of the last safe spaces, real safe spaces in society, where Anthony Jeselnik or Dave Chappelle or some of these other people can question things, and he dared cross one of those lines and question a powerful a woman like Jada Pinkett Smith, and he got smacked, and progressives are happy about it. Not all. I think that there is a lot of nuance out there, because even progressives that I saw originally saying, well, I wish a man would stand up for me like that. I'm like, well, it's like you're craving traditional masculinity or something. So understandable, entirely understandable. But this was clearly a reaction to some sort of underlying issues. And I don't care. Do whatever you want in your sort of weird relationship. The Smiths, that's between them. Whatever underlying issues. About it, in fact. Yeah. Whatever underlying issues.
Anything about it.
manifested in this. There's clearly some underlying issues, and something happened there that manifested in Will Smith being forced by some sort of glare after laughing to go up and assault somebody. But yeah, I do get where you're coming from. If someone were to yell an inappropriate comment, I'd walk over and demand that they apologize. My immediate instinct wouldn't be to clock somebody in the mouth, but I'd go over and be like, listen, you don't talk to her like that. That's completely understandable, but not in this context.
Yeah, for sure.
Get up and leave. Get up and leave. You're Will Smith. You're a star. Right before you win, get up and leave. Be like, my family's not taking this. We're better than this. See you later. That would have been a massive statement.
Yeah,
no,
and as
he
Ezra,
slapped a guy.
As Ezra points out, also, what man goes around slapping another man, by the way?
Yeah.
Like, that's such a lady thing to do. But as Ezra points out, the chivalrous argument falls a little bit flat. Like, I'm all for chivalry. Hold the door open. Somebody talks bad about your wife. They're going to find out that it was a bad idea. Yeah. Fine. I'm perfectly fine with that. Except for the fact that these guys were not, all of Hollywood, by the way, not exactly chivalrous with Epstein and Weinstein running around town, lording power over women. They all kept, not only did they ignore it, they were part of keeping the secret. But now they're chivalrous. Yeah. We need to roll back the clock a little bit if you guys want to start caring about those sorts of things.
Yeah, exactly. I was going to say, if Will Smith were to have decked, he's a bit old, so it might be a bit weird, but I wouldn't have been quite so critical if Will Smith would have paid a visit to Weinstein. That would have been a little more understandable than lashing out. And you know what? There's so much. It's like one of those. There's so much like sickness and festering underneath the scenes in Hollywood that occasionally these things just bubble and boil over. This has nothing to do with. There's no way that he just assaulted a guy based on this one joke alone. There's some underlying issues, but I think you're dead on the money. The amount of horrific stuff that goes on in Hollywood. That these people are intimately familiar with. Ricky Gervais nailed it when he called it out. I think that was the Oscars, Emmys, one of those things anyways. In that speech where he basically said, you're all friends with the Epsteins. Like, you're complicit in all of this. So just take your award, shut up and go away. But yeah, the audacity of Will Smith afterwards. Did we roll the acceptance speech yet? I don't think we did.
Efron tells me we've got it. Let's roll it.
Yeah, let's roll that. After smacking somebody. Right after smacking somebody.
Oh, man. Richard Williams was a fierce defender of his family. In this time in my life, in this moment, I am overwhelmed by what God is calling on me to do and be in this world. Making this film, I got to protect Ingenue Ellis, who was one of the strongest, most delicate people I've ever met. I got to protect Sanaya and Demi, the two actresses that played Venus and Serena.
Didn't protect Chris Rock.
The self-righteousness
I'm being
here.
called on in my life to love people.
10 minutes
and
later.
To
Chris Rock,
people. And to be a river to my people.
What are you talking about?
Now, I know to do what we do, you got to be able to take abuse. You got to be able to have people talk crazy about you.
Like slapping,
in this
being
business,
slapped.
You got to be able to have people disrespecting you. And you got to smile and you got to pretend like that's okay. But Richard Williams, and what I loved, thank you, D. Denzel said to me a few minutes ago, he said, at your highest moment, be careful, that's when the devil comes for you.
It tells you to slap Chris Rock. Denzel's like, don't associate me with this.
Okay,
like
so,
that.
go ahead.
No, go ahead. It's yeah.
I was just gonna say, like, the audacity of this guy. First of all, what makes you think all these other random women that you worked with need you to protect them? This, and like, don't accuse me of being a feminist, but this is just him making excuses for what he just did, that he has this calling from God to run around protecting women. Oh, really? Where were you when Weinstein was lording his power over all these young starlets then? With your mouth shut, hoping to get a role in an or a Weinstein movie. It's just ridiculous. He's standing up there acting all self-righteous. I'm the protector of all these other women. First of all, you are the protector of your family. You're the dad. But that seems, again, falls a little flat with your open relationship business with your wife that I recently just found out about as I was poking around. So again, this whole, like, I'm the dad protecting my family. Okay, then why are you letting other dudes run around with your wife? What really I found remarkable, if I were Chris Rock, I'd be packing my bags and moving to a ranch in the middle of Wyoming, because nobody seems to give a damn about whether or not he was hurt. Like, nobody bothered to see, like, hey, are your teeth loose? Did you lose one? Did you swallow one? During the break, you can see, I think it's Denzel Washington. Again, I don't really know these things. And I think it was a publicist for Will Smith and Jada Pinkett Smith. They sort of run over and comfort Will Smith. Yeah, so we've got this here. So I think this is Denzel comforting Will Smith. What does he need comforting for? Did he hurt his hand on Chris Rock's face? Nobody, if I were Chris Rock, I would be like, none of these people give a damn about me. I need to get out of this Sodom and Gomorrah and get away from these people who just watched me get assaulted on air. And nobody, whether you agree with what Chris Rock said or didn't say, maybe you might want to see, like, do you need some help finding your teeth? None of that even happened.
Yeah. Well, and the fact, and look at this, like, consolation party lining up. Like, it doesn't matter the context. You could be getting a
Imagine
Nobel
being
Peace...
Chris Rock looking at this.
Yeah. It like, you could literally be a Nobel Peace Prize recipient. You've done everything your whole life right. You've done, I mean, not that Nobel Award recipients tend to be good. They tend to be politicized. But regardless, let's say you live your whole life virtuously. You're doing everything right. You're bloody Mother Teresa. You show up at an award ceremony, and right before you give your speech, you literally assault somebody. The award should be taken away and you should be sent home. Like, you shouldn't get to go give a speech 10 minutes after assaulting somebody. And, like, to an extent, I do feel bad for him. He is like a child star. The fact that he's having this emotional breakdown and he's on a tangent that doesn't really make sense to me indicates there's something mentally wrong here, obviously.
There's some kind of mania happening here over the course of this whole thing. He goes from laughing to violent to crying, and then we've got a clip from later on in the evening where we go, like, full circle with the mania.
Euphoric. It's like a manic episode. It's literally a manic episode is what it looks like. Yeah.
And then his, like, emotional outburst, uncontrolled feelings of his acceptance speech, they feel very insincere when you get to the after party.
Like,
when you get to the after
I'm called
party.
to be a river to my people. Like, it's like, if it's Michael Jackson accepting a Lifetime Achievement Award, Michael Jackson can say, I want to be a river to my people. Yeah, Michael Jackson can say that. Will Smith is not quite there yet, especially 10 minutes after smacking one of his people. The people he's professing to advocate for, the community he's professing to advocate for, it's like there's this, it's either serious mental illness, and I hope the guy has help, and I recant anything I've said. He's got some serious issues. Hopefully he gets some help. Or it's like this weird sort of PR strategizing of, no one's talking about me. How do I become relevant? He probably
just won an Oscar.
Maybe he didn't think he was going to win, so he wanted some attention. I don't know. But yeah, it was something else. The other thing too, and well, we don't have to talk about this forever, but the other thing with Will Smith is he was, despite all of this weird stuff, he was often held up as kind of an example of, like, non-violent, respectful hip-hop culture. And lots of young people could look up to him as Yeah, but they could look up to him. I mean, people out there would often criticize him for being like whitewashed or whatever, and I think he addressed that very sort of gracefully. He says, "No, I can be intelligent and educated and use big words and rap, and I can do all that stuff. I can be a successful Hollywood actor and example to kids everywhere." Well, kids who looked up to him to the good guy, now the good guy goes around smacking comedians whose jokes that he doesn't like. So there's there's definitely some legacy tarnishing, and to see everyone just going along with it. To see no one react adversely, everyone comforting him. And let's play this Getting Jiggy with It clip or whatever song it is.
This is crazy. This is crazy because
and everyone fawning around him.
Everyone, like, they're laughing at the normals. And I'll get to why I think that. And this is where I'm at. Look, I'm willing to hear arguments about whether or not you should smack a man for insulting your wife. Where I come from, that might pass the muster.
You wouldn't slap him though. But
no, not slap them. Men shouldn't slap each other. Quit slapping each other, guys. Like what? Anyways. So, I'm pro chivalry, but then it's the crying and claiming that you're a protector. Like a normal guy would have been like, I handled that wrong. Apologies. Don't solve your problems with violence. And I feel like I should have talked to Chris separately, off camera instead of assaulting him in front of millions of people. And this is where watching this clip you guys are about to see here, this is where I know that they are laughing at normal people, because if you or I walked up and assaulted Chris Rock in front of millions of people on camera, we wouldn't be partying. We would be trying out our new bracelets in the Crowbar Hotel, if you know what I mean. Look what Will Smith did. Look how upset he is.
It's almost like he wanted attention. It's basically him and Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson who go off this hard to their own songs. No one else in Hollywood has the.
It's just
gumption.
I see this, and I see all these people laughing at the normals because they know the rules don't apply to them, and that's the part that I can't stand about this.
Yeah.
Smack a man for insulting your wife. I'm willing to hear that argument.
Yeah.
You're acting chivalrous, again, willing to hear that argument. Falls flat given what we know about the Sodom and Gomorrah of Hollywood these days that has come out in court trials all over the place. But this is the part that bugs me, is because he stood up there minutes earlier and cried about what he had just had to go through by smacking Chris Rock in the face, that he was the victim there. And then he performs like this, knowing that there are zero consequences for the act of violence he committed against somebody else. I think our society falls down on, you don't solve your verbal problems with violence. That's sort of like where normal people fall on this. But they know there are zero consequences for him. And online people are like, oh, look at him. He's the GOAT. He's the greatest of all time. He defended his wife. Okay, fine. Again, willing to hear that argument. And look at him. He's partying. He won an Oscar and he's partying. Look at this. Best night of Will Smith's life. And it's like, no, these people are laughing at you. They're laughing at you.
And like, it's crazy how bloodthirsty progressives are when it's like their people. Like they're so eager to see cops beating up freedom protesters and to see Will Smith smacking Chris Rock and to see all this violent escalation. If it goes the other way, though, when a cop defends themselves and it discharges their service arm, then it's the end of the world and violence is terrible. But it's crazy how bloodthirsty they are. They want violence on some sort of underlying level. They act like, oh, we're all very feminine and there's no masculine virtue here and masculinity is toxic. We're all gentle, but then they love to see this escalation and this violence. It's very much the modern sort of gladiator thing. And Will Smith could have come out at the start of his acceptance speech. This is the only way the situation was recoverable. If he would have sort of said, like, I connected a little harder than intended there, like made like I was just trying to sort of make a joke about it and set you straight. But he didn't do that. He acted like he was the prophet and Messiah there to protect
the victim
and love, assigned by God to smack Chris Rock. madness. I'm sure people are sick about hearing about this.
Yeah.
It's been out there nonstop, but we did definitely want to get into it a little bit. So, yeah.
Okay, we should move along to the other news of the day because, again, we just saw Hollywood laughing at normal people, how rules don't apply to them.
Yeah.
And I think it clearly has to do with because they are just a progressive hellscape of Hollywood. But if you're
Speaking of progressive hellscapes.
Yeah. Speaking of progressive hellscapes, let's talk about Ottawa. And how if your politics don't align with their progressivism, they're going to throw the book at you. You can smack a guy in front of millions of people. Perfectly fine. Cops don't come. But if you protest the government, oppose the government as a member of an opposing party or as an independent opposition member, you can go straight to jail. And Randy Hillier, he's facing 9 charges after the Ottawa convoy protest. Hillier was expected to turn himself in Monday morning, which he did. I'm just reading this off CBC, but because they have the list of the breakdown of the new charges. The new charges are, oh, look at this. This is shocking because this is policing by mob justice. So CBC reports that Ottawa police announced 9 charges against independent Lanark Frontenac Kingston MPP Randy Hillier in a Monday morning news release saying they had complaints. So the mob did this. Complaints about social media posts and other activities of an individual during the so-called Freedom Convoy. The charges are 1 count of assaulting a peace officer or public officer. When did this happen? 1 count of obstructing or resisting a public officer. This is one of those catch-all charges that they can do their best to make stick because it's kind of vague. Excuse me. 1 count of obstructing or resisting someone aiding a public or police officer or peace officer. Again, catch-all. 3 counts of Three counts of counseling an uncommitted indictable offense. 2 of them considered mischief. So what is that? He may have told people to honk their horns, and yet the people didn't, because this is an uncommitted indictable offense. And
or maybe it was intending an event. It could have been, hey, we're doing this thing. Maybe
you should come too.
Yeah.
You could say you should come to the convoy. And since they made protesting basically illegal in Ottawa, that might be what they considered. And 2 counts of mischief or obstructing property exceeding $5,000. Hillier surrendered at Ottawa Police Headquarters Monday morning. He told reporters he was doing so after getting a call from police Sunday. He denied assaulting an officer, saying he only greeted people with love and affection and embrace and handshakes. So unless handshakes and warm embraces are now considered assault, I have no idea. David Menzies got in trouble for shaking hands. So who knows? And he's got a really, really, really great lawyer, David Amber, who was on some of the Fight the Fines cases. So it sounds like he'll get a Monday bail hearing. So I think he's still in custody.
Yep.
And this is outrageous. So there were calls for Hillier's arrest. So this is the thing that really bothers me, because police are responding to mob calls from the left for Hillier's arrest. There were calls for Hillier's arrest in February after he tweeted that people should keep calling, after Ottawa police tweeted that people had to stop calling critical emergency and operational phone lines to express their displeasure over police actions to clear the streets. So the police were mad because people were calling the police complaints line to complain about the police and how the police were engaging in trying to control the peaceful protesters. For example, maybe they got a complaint that a police officer shot a journalist at point blank range with a pepper canister. Who do you tell? You call the police
using horses as weapons.
Yeah, or they're trampling old ladies with horses. Who do you call? You call the complaints line. Now, that's not the emergency line. That's the police complaints line. Hillier's also facing charges for breaking COVID pandemic rules, and said Monday he's facing about 25 charges for various COVID protests. So he, as a member of the opposition, was attending protests to oppose government policy and government restrictions, and he was issued citations for that, and he's got 25 of those. This is absolutely insane. This is criminalizing opposition to the government
Yeah,
here.
yeah, that's exactly
And it's
what it
his
is.
job. That's what he takes a salary for.
Yeah, yeah. It's, you know, the wild thing is, and I want to touch on one thing first, really, really quickly.
Yep, please
We
go.
talked about those assault charges. We'll have an interview coming out today with the young man Devlin, who were arrested at the Calgary protests last Saturday. And one of the charges that he is facing is aggravated assault, I believe. It's either assault or aggravated assault. The wild thing is that this officer who lied, and I can say that on record, objectively lied, said that Devlin, who in the video, by the way, you can clearly see is pinned on the ground, his legs are actually stuck in front of him, and they're pushing him downwards with his arms behind his back. So he can't move his legs under him. And he's saying, I'm complying, I'm not resisting, I just can't move my legs that way. Then they tased him, by the way. But they're saying this cop, they're alleging that he engaged in aggravated assault against this officer. Clearly in the video, and the police were filming too, another person is trying to get out of the way and the cop trips on him. It's not Devlin. He doesn't come close to him. He's on the ground and the cop falls through these bushes. They're moving backwards. The cop trips on somebody. It's completely apparent. And they're literally still charging this guy. Devlin's got himself an excellent lawyer. They're going on the offensive here. But yeah, so that's the position he's in. And they're telling him to move his legs behind him, but they're not letting him move. Then they tase him. But one of the officers there, I don't know if it's in this shot, eventually trips, but someone else is running by and he trips over him. They're bogusly saying that he assaulted him. So there's no doubt something likely similar going on with Randy Hillier. But the other thing I want to get into here is that these government officials, whether it's in Alberta, whether it's in Ontario, they've never actually gone to court to defend these measures. They've never been in court to say that, oh, well, these measures are justifiable and protesting is illegal. Ultimately, what they've just done is with ex parte orders and de facto declarations is declared protests illegal. You might be able to make some sort of argument, if indeed these protests are illegal, that inviting people to them to attend is inciting people to participate in criminal activity. The problem is it's not criminal activity. GiveSendGo was lied to, GoFundMe was lied to by government officials saying it was violent. After the fact, they said, well, we relied on information that was false. Media was reporting that there was loaded firearms at these trucker convoys. We now know that that's not true either. There's all these lies, and they manifested this governmental response based on lies that, frankly, the government was propagating. And now they're punishing people for attending these peaceful protests, often suggesting that they're still violent when that narrative has completely fallen by the wayside. You look at Pastor Artur Pawlowski, you look at Randy Hillier, you look at Tamara Lich, you look at all these people, and you look at the response of the European Parliament members to Justin Trudeau. The world knows this. Canadians are somehow apathetic, but the world is calling Justin Trudeau a fascist and a dictator and a tyrant, and ultimately a Chinese communist sympathizer who wants to destroy opposition. That's what is happening here. This individual, can you issue a ticket if there's a valid injunction from a judge for honking? I think it's silly, but sure, you might be able to. But levying a pile of charges like they've done against Pastor Artur Pawlowski without basis, based on now expired health order restrictions that were never tested in court, it's insane. And we've heard politicians time and time again say it's lawlessness, it's lawlessness. Well, it is 100% lawlessness, but the lawlessness is not the truckers and the protesters. The lawlessness is the politicians and government officials who seemingly think that they can throw the Charter of Rights and Freedoms away, think that they can ignore the criminal code and break the law. They're the ones who are breaking the law. They're the ones assaulting people. They're the ones damaging people's property. And if there is any semblance of justice, if there is any sort of justice done that adheres to the Charter and the criminal code, they will be held accountable. And these people will be exonerated beyond anything but a ticket. It's madness, and it is. I agree with Rachel Notley and Justin Trudeau and all these people saying it's lawlessness, but it's not the protesters, it's them, it's the courts.
Yeah, and the absolute lying from the police. Like, I look at these trumped up charges that they've got Randy Hillier on. We have to recall that this is the same police force that lied to GoFundMe and said that the protesters were being violent. They stood up the new interim police chief, Bell. He stood up and said the protesters very nearly injured a horse by throwing a bike at a horse. Well, the whole world is looking at a video saying, no, actually, you trampled a couple of people and sent one lady to the hospital. He said he had absolutely no clue about what what happened to Alexa. So
Yeah.
why would anybody believe?
We didn't point guns at anybody, and there's 100 videos of them pointing guns at people.
Yeah, saying they didn't point guns at anybody. All this stuff, though, the unskeptical mainstream media who remain terrible. And the convoy, besides exposing politicians, really exposed how terrible the mainstream media is.
Yeah.
They ran with all these lies. These lies that they knew were completely untrue.
Yeah.
They ran with every single one of them. You know, and they hate us so much, but we'll never go away as long as they remain terrible.
The wild thing is we saw literally with the previous police chief who was booted for not dropping the hammer. He didn't Will Smith the truck protesters and go up there and escalate things. We talk about de-escalation, but we saw these truckers basically peacefully protesting. Maybe there's a bit of inconvenience, but hey, when you completely undermine people's fundamental rights and then they protest, the intent is for there to be minor inconvenience. They're there to make a point. But you saw the police chief booted, and then you saw a new police chief come in and he was hammer down militant. He broke the law. Like, he literally was pointing guns at people's faces and mowing over ladies. And then you saw the same thing. We can keep talking about Ottawa a bit, but you really did see the same thing here. The police chief was accommodating peaceful protests. For 2 years, there was no incidents whatsoever. Suddenly, violent counter-protesters show up, and Mayor Jyoti Gondek has a tantrum saying that those people are allowed to be violent, disregard police orders, and block the road and counter-protest, but freedom fighters can't peacefully protest. And then we saw a sudden escalation with arrests and enforcement and violence and ticketing at the behest of a mayor who happened to be in a mood and decry one group. Like that, I'm 100% sure that police chief in Calgary, Mark Neufeld, he felt the pressure. Well, I don't want to be shown the road for not coming down hard on these guys, so we're going to come down on them hard too. I do think that there's a degree more measure, and he was, despite a bunch of madness, in trying to make sure people could still protest in one way or another. But regardless, he went from completely peaceful to escalating the situation at the behest of, once again, a political mayor, not law enforcement.
Yeah, and it's just so petty. I think we've got a clip from Mocha, if you wouldn't mind getting to that, Efron, of Calgarians being fined $81 for honking in support of the Freedom Rally. I can tell you in Edmonton, they've doubled the cost of the ticket to $162 because nobody cared. Nobody was playing along with the honking. It didn't. The honking ban in Edmonton, it didn't stop the honking, so they doubled the ticket. I ran into a lady over the weekend that we're going to help with that ticket. I checked with the lawyers at the Democracy Fund this morning. They said they will help her, but it's just petty. They're doing everything they can to stop the people from showing up and peacefully protesting. And as you know, honking your horn is a salute to
you can smack somebody on the Oscars, but you cannot honk your horn.
But you cannot honk. Why don't we roll this clip? This is somebody getting a honking ticket.
Are you guys getting a ticket for honking?
Fuck yeah, for honking.
For honking,
Fuck that guy. Sleep well. Piece of shit.
What do you make of this?
Yo, it's bullshit. This gets their fucking freedoms and rights. Yo, whether someone walked in their way or we just honked to say thank you. Absolute fucking bullshit.
And you get a ticket for that?
Yep.
Yeah. It seems like you're not the only one. There are a couple of more cars.
Everybody. Yo, pull more people over. Absolute tyranny. Fuck Trudeau!
You know, there's so much profanity here. Let's mosey on from the audio. But it was so funny. So after we were wrapping up and the protests were starting to wrap up, there are a bunch of these cops who watch Rebel News. They like us. They come up to us and talk to us. And when I was walking back to my car, they're actually standing on the corner when cars are honking and radioing ahead the license plates to people in order to give out tickets. Yeah.
I go, so you can't honk your horn ever? Well, yeah, there's an injunction. So that was his excuse to me.
Wow.
So these cops that we know, and I looked at them and I just gave them this sort of head shake, like...
Gross.
Every car that honks, they're running out, getting their plates and radioing ahead. It was so pathetic. The other thing that I wanted to get into with the Calgary protests is, so this injunction effectively at the... They're $81, yeah.
81, yeah.
Oh, I don't know.
You don't remember?
That one there, I maybe honked 3 times.
Yeah, the lady that I met over the weekend, she's like, they didn't even know why I was honking. They're like, she's like, maybe there were ducklings crossing the road or a cat that was crossing the road, but they just heard my horn and pulled me over.
Yeah. So the
How you can't
madness
even honk your
here
horn in Calgary.
is they originally they were doing their best to try and comply with the injunction, because they obviously don't want to break the law. There's Jesse Johnson. Didn't want to break the law. So they're like, okay, well, we can go to City Hall because that's not a park. That's not violating the injunction. So suddenly the Bangladeshi independence community, with insufficient notice, booked City Hall out for a flag raising ceremony that they didn't end up doing. So they booked it out, said they couldn't go there, but they didn't end up doing that. So whatever they canceled, I guess the police media relations person said they did book it, whatever. I don't believe them because they didn't give sufficient notice. But anyways, so then they moved to Olympic Plaza, where they were told that originally they would be able to use amplification in that area would be exempt. So everyone met there. But then a couple of days later, they rescinded the opportunity for that to be a place where they could use amplification. So on a whim, they then had to go to the park, the Hodgkinson Park, I think, outside of the Calgary Court Center anyways. And finally, that is where they were allowed to gather and protest with amplification and do everything. There was a significant police presence. The counter protesters were nowhere to be seen. That speaks to the fact, and the police chief even said this, the counter protesters, I think they realized the optics weren't looking good because they were the ones being violent. They were the ones escalating. And unlike these protests that have been going on organically for 2 years, so the people keep coming, once the optics look bad, the organized counter protesters just stop. So they had like a book reading event in a park and a few people showed up, but like the paid activists weren't there. So it was absolutely nothing. And guess what? 2 years peace. There's a couple of weeks where counter protesters show up. There's violence and smoke bombs. They don't show up again. Everything's peaceful again and everything's fine. And aside from some drone flying stuff and some traffic tickets, there was one arrest actually that took place, but it wasn't even at this protest. At the protest, there was no tickets, no fines, nothing. It was just, yeah, you guys are allowed to protest again. You're just at a different location. So we saw this insane escalation at the behest of the mayor, and her rhetoric 100% radicalized the Antifa crowd and these militants to come out and fight back. Because she said they're not counter protesters. They're people justified defending their neighborhoods, and they have every right to do that. She escalated, and if anyone's going to be charged with escalating, increasing violence, causing illegal protests, it should be Mayor Jyoti Gondek. She's the one who literally invited people to block the streets, disobey police, and defend their neighborhood against a peaceful protest.
Yeah, it reminds me of that crazy, absolutely insane liberal MP who said that honking your horn is basically a Roman salute to the ghost of Adolf Hitler. That radicalizes people. That weaponizes the Antifa activists who wear the Punch Nazis shirts, but the supply of Nazis does not meet the demand. So she's like, you know what? All those people over there are Nazis. So what does that tell the Punch Nazis crowd? Just go and punch those nice, peaceful people because they honked their horn. That's what that was meant to do. It does radicalize these crazy people, and it gives them permission to go around assaulting people.
Yeah, 100%. And it's so shocking to see that this has become the norm, especially in Calgary of all places, that we have a mayor who so hates her own people. Literally, she said in a tweet, like, oh, well, the people who are blocking the road, blocking an organized protest that was being guided by police, and the police had to physically move them. They were disobeying police. They were actually obstructing justice and obstructing police activity. She said those people are entirely justified. That is a direct sort of from the mayor directly ordering people to contravene the actions of police. It's incredibly shocking to see. So I said, well, they are counter protesters in a tweet, very respectfully. They are counter protesters, and they quite simply are not obeying the police, like they're breaking the law. And enforcement on that day was moving them out of the way so the peaceful protest could continue. She immediately blocked me. I wasn't disrespectful. I didn't say anything, just blocked, no engagement whatsoever. She has no interest in the vast majority. When you see thousands of people coming out week after week for these freedom protests, and then you have 12 paid activists countering them, and she's saying those are the good guys. It's a sad situation.
Now, Calgary's tyranny has actually spilled over into Edmonton, and that should really come as no surprise. Yesterday evening, the weekend sort of blended together for me a little bit there. But yesterday evening, I was out at the Edmonton Remand Center because we know that the system has moved Pastor Art Pawlowski to the Edmonton Remand, which makes me worried that he's in for the long haul, because that's where they sort of shuffle the longer term offenders as they await trial. And it's Canada's largest prison. That's what the Remand Center is. And as you know, for those of you who aren't following along, although you can get all the details at saveartur.com and support his legal battle there. Pastor Art, his trouble started at the beginning of the pandemic. He was feeding the homeless in downtown Calgary, bitterly cold day, because that's what he's called by God to do. That's what he's always done. And he was there feeding the homeless. The city officials came over and said, that's an illegal public gathering during the time of COVID. Here's a ticket. And they did this repeatedly. He never stopped feeding the homeless. He can't. They rely on him. These are people who can't go to shelters. Now, from there, it sort of spiraled, because then he refused to limit his church to comply with COVID restrictions, because he will not turn away a worshiper. And he will not do anything that impedes their ability to worship together and join together in fellowship. So if they wanted to wear a mask, fine. If they didn't want to, that's fine too. Social distance, fine. If you didn't want to, that's fine too. But he wasn't going to turn anybody away. So then health officials started trying to inspect the church, and that's where we get the famous get out, where he cast the devils out. That's where we get that video from. Now, from that, the government started getting these ex parte orders, secret orders, even though they know full well that Art has a long-term lawyer, Sarah Miller from JSS Barristers, who's been working like a lion for him. But they didn't tell her that they were getting these court orders against him, because they know Sarah will argue valiantly against them. So they go and get these orders that say that they can come and inspect his church basically at any time, 8 to 8. So while church services are happening, while, there's kids downstairs in the daycare, all that stuff.
Which is illegal, by the way, but yes, continue.
Which is illegal, 176 of the criminal code. You can't interrupt a church service. But they also got another court order that restricted his ability to protest, because then they made protests outside an illegal public gathering. And under that court order, Art was arrested and held for 3 days. Likewise, Chris Scott from the Whistle Stop was arrested and held for 3 days, because he was protesting at his own restaurant that they seized his restaurant and his campground and his gas station and his convenience store, held for 3 days. So Art then goes, lots of legal wrangling to get him out. This is one of the high profile takedowns. Lots of legal wrangling to get him out of jail. He was given a compelled speech order wherein he had to renounce his own opinions about COVID and lockdowns before he could speak publicly. And that includes from the pulpit in his own church, which is outrageous. But that compelled speech order, again, Sarah argued and had that squashed, awaiting appeal of his other sanctions. Art was arrested after giving a speech to the truckers at the Coutts border. He was arrested under a rule, a new, never before used law, little known law, designed to deal with pipeline bombers and wellhead saboteurs. It's the Critical Infrastructure Defense Act. And he was also arrested and charged for criminal mischief. They basically accuse him of being the mastermind of what happened at Coutts, where truckers and farmers, locals, were blocking the border. He's not a local to Coutts. And the protest was happening before he got there, and it went on after he left. He went same day, gave a sermon, and left. Somehow he's the criminal mastermind, according to the government, of this. Yeah. He's been held in jail now. We're approaching 50 days. On Friday, he was granted bail on these charges, but they have not released him. Instead, they moved him to Edmonton and are holding him on other breaches of other conditions. They have no intention of letting this man go. And again, what you're watching right here, this is the crime for which they've held this man for approaching 50 days. This is it. This is what it's like in Alberta. And they moved him. Sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
No, I just wanted to say, because you said 50 days there, the absolute madness of this is, one, a number of the other charges that are sort of pending that are holding him are not likely to stick. One, literally, it stems to he didn't wear a mask at an outdoor protest, and he was trying to get his mail from a Canada post office. They wouldn't let him get it. So he actually called the police just saying, I'm just trying to get my mail. What can we do here? So they're very non-substantial charges. They're likely to fade away. So the items that they currently have, but let's say Pastor Artur Pawlowski is charged, found guilty, and given the supreme penalty, the most severe sanctions for every single alleged crime that he has committed. If you serve time in incarceration pre-trial, you get additional credit for it.
2 for 1 usually.
Sometimes it's 1.5, sometimes it's 2 for 1. Regardless, though, with 50 days, he's served 70 plus days already. The cumulative punishments and the worst case scenarios for the nature of his offenses will not reach anywhere near the time that he's already served, and yet he is still being held. It's extremely problematic. Unfortunately, there are matters that were actually discussed within the proceedings. There's a publication ban in effect to prevent to protect effectively the witnesses and Pastor Arthur's case. That's not a cover-up or anything. It was requested by Sarah Miller because some of the testimony, they wanted to ensure those individuals weren't being harassed. But he has spent more time in jail than incarcerated than he would being charged on all of these things. It's extremely troubling. Like you said, there is hope that he can get out. The most serious charges, he has been granted bail with a number of conditions on, but it seems like whenever something goes away, something else comes up, often stemming from prior incidents, old incidents. So we're very much going to see in the next day or two whether the Crown comes up with a whole bunch of new stuff, or if they're like, well, he's already been granted bail on these more serious matters. There's been an appeal process. Even the sanctions with compelled speech and all this, those have been held over until appeal. There seems to be some semblance from the court and judges of measure drawing back from this overreach and these oversteps. So hopefully the Crown takes note of that. But if we know anything from their conduct towards Pastor Artur Pawlowski so far, they seem to just want to get the guy, even if it's complete without foundation. So we'll see in the next couple of days what exactly comes of it. I will have an update. Sarah is going to be in court today again. Tomorrow evening, I'm going to talk to Sarah about this. And I want to let people know I did talk to Nathaniel Pawlowski. That interview will be out today about the bail process, about his father being moved to Edmonton. So we do have a lot of updates coming your way on this.
Yeah, there were about 200 people at the Remand Center in Edmonton last night. I hadn't been there since James Coates, another pastor, was held for about 35 days. These are the people that Jason Kenney calls bugs, generally kooky people, the angry. These are the people that Jason Kenney wrote off last week. Look at these angry people. Look at
those
how awful.
Nationalistic flag symbols and the singing. You know what?
Can we roll this back? Yeah, they're singing, dancing, praying. They said the Lord's Prayer in Dene and then in English because apparently they're, white nationalists, as the mainstream media would have you believe. But there's a pretty serious Indigenous contingent here, and a lot of them are very grateful for the work that Pastor Art does for the marginalized, homeless, Indigenous population of Calgary. But if we might want to roll the audio here, because they're singing this little light of mine. That's good.
Radicals, violent, angry. You can see by the angry faces that these are very, very bad people.
Yeah,
and they should be imprisoned as well for daring to question Justin Trudeau's sunny ways and official government narrative.
Yeah, I mean, these are people making a joyful noise because they don't know what else to do to support art, but they also take a lot of comfort knowing that art is probably ministering to people. Inside the Remand Center, they said, well, they moved him to a bigger prison, so he has more people to help. So I guess that's good. And we know that art. He's called within his heart to help marginalized people.
The wildest thing, and this will be in my update with Nathaniel Pawlowski, but I'll give you a bit of a sneak peek. He was actually on his way to do a Bible study with the prisoners at Calgary Remand, so they were all waiting for him. Then the guards came and told Pastor Artur that he had a visitor. So he said, oh, okay, I don't get too many visitors. Even Sarah Miller struggles to get in his own lawyer to speak with him, which is an additional concern now that he's moved to Edmonton. But they told him he has a visitor. So he goes with them, didn't get to get anything out of his cell, didn't get to say goodbye to anybody. And instead of walking him to the visiting room, they walk him to a van and drive him to Red Deer and then move him to another van. They didn't tell him what was happening. He was scared as they were driving. And once he got to Edmonton, they gave him a note explaining why he was moved, some of the details about why he was moved. So he literally, the inmates, the Pawlowskis actually got calls from other inmates saying they were concerned because he disappeared. He literally just disappeared with his stuff still in his cell. So those details and more are coming up in the interview with Nathaniel Pawlowski today. But for those, if anyone is extremely concerned, Pastor Archer is actually receiving slightly better care in Edmonton remand. Because he's I think I can't be sure, but because for religious reasons he always wants someone fasting while he's incarcerated. So if he's not fasting, members of his family are fasting because they're very prayerful, they're very religious, so they're kind of taking turns. So perhaps, I know in the past they've attempted to suggest that there's something psychologically wrong with him for practicing the religious practice that Muslims and Christians and Sikhs and exactly.
It's fasting right now.
Exactly. So maybe there's some suggestion that that's why he's in there, but he actually is in the sort of psychological care unit. So he gets a bed and a blanket and he's not freezing at all times. He's not in the little chicken cage. So he's receiving slightly better treatment. So that's a good thing. But still, the fact he was just moved in sort of nebulous and sudden terms and didn't even get to say bye to people. Like incarcerated criminals were calling the Pawlowskis concerned over whether they'd done something to Archer. So extremely troubling stuff. Again, keep an eye out for that interview today, though, with Nathaniel.
My coverage of the protest at the jail should be out later on today. I had a couple of very interesting conversations there. There's a Polish lady that comes to all these church protests that I just enjoy her so much because she was a political prisoner when Poland was under Soviet rule. And she came to Canada. She was promised freedom. And she said, this is the same stuff that they did to us there. This is the very same stuff. And there's an extra layer there because she was a work-at-home employee from CNRL and she was fired or laid off because she refused to get the vaccine. And that pressure from her job actually triggered PTSD from the time that she was a political prisoner. And now, even though CNRL has revoked their vaccine mandate, she is in no condition to go back to work because of the PTSD triggered by CNRL's actions that have brought her back to the time that she was a political prisoner in Poland under Soviet rule. And they just have so completely washed their hands of her. But I am assured that Pastor Art is receiving better treatment, as good as treatment can be, in the Edmonton Remand Center, because I had the pleasure of also meeting a former guard there who was also laid off because of the vaccine passport system. And she said much better conditions here for him than in the Calgary Remand Center. So she said, all things considered, if he's in here for the long haul, which is an absolute injustice and should never happen, but if he's going to be somewhere, this is the better place for him to be.
It is sad to see from the very get-go. Canadians are very apathetic. We're talking about, especially among the younger generation, of which I kind of consider myself a part. They do this polling about people sympathizing with communist ideology, despite the hundreds of millions that communism has killed. People not knowing what the Nazis did, not knowing about Auschwitz and these other concentration camps. The people from these countries, the people from Vietnam, the boat people who escaped communism, the Chinese immigrants who, whether they be from Hong Kong presently or from China back in the day, escaping, coming to this country, those people who lived this history, not those people who don't even know that it existed, but the people who lived this history and actually have life experience that they can relate to, they have been the ones since the onset of these restrictions, and very much since the onset of Justin Trudeau in this country, who have been saying, we have seen this before, be careful. We have seen this. It's been the Polish people, the Vietnamese people, the Chinese people, the Eastern Europeans. They've been the ones saying, we've seen this before, we have to be careful. And people discounted them. Very often the people who are all about hearing from immigrant communities in the margins discounted them as conservative kooks. They're not conservative kooks. There's a term for those people. They're called survivors. And this is the time where we should believe and we should listen to survivors, because they're not out there protesting for fun. They're not getting together weekend after weekend despite threats of arrest, despite cold weather, because they're bored and they have nothing better to do. They've seen the ultimate outcome of the course that we are on under Justin Trudeau. They have seen it firsthand, and they are not going to stand for it. And I think we could humble ourselves just a wee little bit and learn from their life experiences, instead of imposing our sort of privileged Canadian comfortable understanding that freedom will always be there and it's just easily attained. Trust some people who have lost it and moved here in order to find it again. You can lose it just like that. As my shirt says, freedom isn't free. It has to be fought for and earned. And listen to these immigrant communities, these people who escaped communism, and you might learn a thing or two.
Yeah, and outside of, and I noticed this particularly when dealing with Pastor Art, outside of Eastern Europeans and Chinese expats and new Canadians from China, it's the Indigenous community who are out there saying, do not listen to the government when they tell you they know what's best for your family. People who have survived residential schools, they are saying, do not let the government tell you they know what's best for your families, because that's what happened to us. So there's a very large contingent of those people out there trying to warn the rest of us in our comfortable first world lifestyles that, as you say, freedom isn't free. And the creeping tyranny, it's not just creeping anymore. It's gone from crawling to running.
Yeah. Yeah, and thank God for the European Union, or rather the European Parliament members, calling that out. They're the very people. Everyone's seen the clips of them decrying Justin Trudeau. They're the very people that Justin Trudeau panders to. They're the very people that he espouses the World Economic Forum ideologies, all these carbon pricing schemes. The European Parliament is who he wants to get in with and the values he's espousing. And even with all that, those people are decrying him as a tyrant and overreaching counter example to democracy. And they criticized him and they all left because they didn't want to hear it. It's across the board, left, right, center, comedians, Indigenous communities, survivors of communism, across the board. The reason that Justin Trudeau has made this union with the NDP is because the NDP is powerless. They want to get anything done, they have to completely give in to Justin Trudeau. And Justin Trudeau knows he doesn't have the mandate or the popular support to do what he wants. That's why he made that alliance. He knows everyone's turning on him. He wants to inflict as much damage, which is what he's doing now. I don't think we can argue that he wants to help anybody. He wants to inflict as much damage as he can until he gets shown the road. So
now, before we move on, I just want to reiterate, if you want to see all of our coverage of Pastor Art Pawlowski's trials and tribulations, you can go to savearcher.com. We've published a lot of the prior court judgments against him and some of the restrictions and some of our new, like the appeals when things come in. We're constantly updating with the lawyers so that you can get the truth from the horse's mouth instead of filtered through the mainstream media who hates somebody like Art. You can actually see the statement that got Art in trouble where he says, hold the line. But he also calls for peaceful resistance, peaceful civil disobedience. That's why he's in jail right now. So you can see all of that, and you can support his legal fees at savearcher.com. And it's important to note that Art is being helped through the Democracy Fund. That's a registered Canadian charity that works to advance civil liberties, but also to educate on civil liberties. So if you do make a donation to savearcher.com, all of those qualify for a charitable tax receipt because the work they are doing there is definitely charitable and in the public interest, because Art is fighting for everybody's freedoms, just not his own.
You know, the things that Martin Luther King said under Justin Trudeau's government would have landed him in jail as well, 110%.
Oh, 100%.
I want to make that abundantly clear. He would be in jail in this country as well, too.
Twitter would kick him off.
100%. The other thing that I want to say, though, is the categorical, I'd urge our friends at CTV Global and these other outlets, the categorical misinformation or the lack of understanding that we see from these outlets on these stories is extremely troubling. For one, the fact that they don't show up and they don't report on the stories, they don't
Not
attend
a
these
single
protests.
mainstream media journalist there last night. 200
No.
people are singing in front of the Reman Center. Nobody thought it was newsworthy.
Yeah, they'll show up if they think there's going to be a fight, or if counter protesters are there to do a pity piece about these poor people in their community, but they don't care about the thousands of people who've lost everything. But we saw, it was Global or CTV, one of those two, the journalists saying, well, why wasn't David Pawlowski immediately arrested for not reading this compelled speech mandate, Global, for not reading this compelled speech mandate? It's stayed. Your facts aren't even right. Sarah Miller appealed it, and the appeal process was approved, and those terms are stayed until the appeal is heard. So that's not accurate information. We also saw articles basically stating that Artur Pawlowski recently was one of the prime organizers of protests. He attends and speaks at protests, but he hasn't organized a single protest. He does street church and he does his church. He doesn't organize any of these protests. So the categorical misinformation out there. So I urge not only folks out there to donate to legal fees, because his battle is far from over. Even if he's released now, he's going to have court dates until November 2022 and beyond. He can't fight this fight on his own. So folks, go there, donate. But even to the mainstream media outlets out there who are at least pretending to report on this story, go to saveartur.com, watch some of my interviews with Sarah Miller and with the Pawlowski family, so you can actually get the facts straight, because the misinformation that you're spreading out there is often being regurgitated and repeated, whether it be in courts or in the public square, and it's miscategorizing what is happening here. So make sure to go to that website and get your facts straight.
Speaking of getting the facts straight, I know people told us to move on from Chris Rock, and we're way past the top of the hour, but I just want to bring this up. I know people don't mind. And I know that some people have said move on from Chris Rock and Will Smith, but I just think it is interesting to note that Chris Rock made a movie in 2009 called Good Hair, and it was about Black women's hair. And so he's done probably more work on the connection between self-esteem and culture and hair for Black women than anybody else, including Will Smith. According to
that's actually a super interesting movie. It's good.
Yeah, I didn't watch it, but I feel like I should because I have problematic hair. So according to the official synopsis, the film follows Rock as he did the work here. Visits beauty salons and hairstyling battles, scientific laboratories, Indian temples to explore the way hairstyles impact the activities, pocketbooks, sexual relationships, and self-esteem of the Black community in this expose of comic proportions that only he could pull off. It's an adventure prompted by Rock's daughter approaching him and asking, "Daddy, how come I don't have good hair?" And so he talked to Ice-T, Nia Long, Paul Mooney, Raven Simone, Maya Angelou, Salt and Pepper, Eve, Al Sharpton of all people, and he's trying to figure out how to respond to his daughter's question. So he's done more work. He got slapped in the face for a joke, but it's not that he takes this issue unlightly. He went and did an entire documentary because he cares so much about how his daughter's self-esteem and her culture is tied to her hair. Yeah.
And I'm so happy you brought this up. I didn't even remember this, to be honest, but I have seen this movie. Even there's within the communities, there's like bleaching and painful processes, and they're trying to make their hair look more white. And the other thing too is they're on welfare, some of these people in these communities, and they're just scraping by. They're working off the record, and they're spending like more than you or I would spend on hair in 10 years in a month on weaves, because it's like such an essential part of society, because they've basically been convinced that their hair, which Black hair is beautiful, by the way, I'm not even just saying that to be virtuous, it's incredible. They've been told by society that it's ugly and it needs to be more white. So Chris Rock goes out of his way to address that and say Black hair is beautiful and you don't need to make your hair look white, and you don't need to spend a fortune. So it's incredible. He dives into it in such a sort of nuanced, and he comes at it from a male perspective. I don't know what's going on here. Yeah, exactly. Very much from So, and it's incredible that this is such a tie-in. Thanks for bringing that up. That's brilliant. I encourage people to watch it. It's interesting. I found a bunch of it shocking, the cultural stuff. Here they go to a temple where they're gathering hair. It's a fascinating film for sure.
Yeah, he's the last guy who should be accused of being insensitive about a Black woman's hair.
Yeah.
But anyway, none of this matters because Will Smith is the best ever, apparently.
Yeah.
Anyway, it's gross. We should get to some of these chats before we sign off because we're well past. And I know you have a busy day and I do too. So we've got one from Kane and Mark, gives us $3. Will says the Oscars are so white 2 years ago. Now Oscars are so black. LOL. I don't know. I didn't watch the Oscars 2 years ago. I didn't watch them last night either. I just caught up to see what was happening on Twitter. I'm not interested in any of it. Even the movies that win Oscars, I'm like, why? I would never watch that.
There's such a standard recipe of just getting some historical piece, whether it be about a musician or a historical figure, and whether it's good or not, particularly if it deals with the gay community or the Black community or some sort of marginalized community. Even if it's a bad movie like that dreadful Bohemian Rhapsody, it just gets nominated. It can be an objectively horrible film, and it'll get nominated and very often win because it's espousing the right values.
Right. Like the movie with the lady who had the relationship with the fish man. What was that called?
I don't know.
I didn't watch it. Yeah, Shape of Water. And I was like, I'm not watching that. That's just weird. No, I'm not doing it.
So Guillermo del Toro made that. He has like an interesting aesthetic. So a friend of mine, he's actually a priest. He's like, oh, there's a new Guillermo del Toro movie. You want to go see it? And we hadn't read anything of it about it. And so we went and saw this, and at the end we're like, yeah, that was super awkward. The joking name for the film is Grinding Nemo. Shape of Water. Yeah, so I saw it with a priest. It was after he's like, well, I wish I would have read a review before I suggested we go see that movie because that was weird.
Yeah.
It's a semi-interesting film, but it's very bizarre.
I'm not spending 2 hours on that.
No.
Time better spent on the treadmill or in the garden. Becca Henderson gives us $1. Will got in one little and his mom got scared, said you're moving with your auntie and uncle in uncle's home in Bel Air. Yeah. Kane Enmark gives us $1 and says it's Pastor Archer's birthday today.
Yep. Happy birthday, Archer.
Yeah, exactly.
Hopefully we'll see you soon.
Chipmaker123, you can see in a different video, I think this is referring to your story with the independent journalist. You can see in one video, one policeman punching that young guy. He should sue them for $10 million.
So he does have a very good lawyer. The lawyer that he did get is they're actually launching an offensive campaign already. And the lawyer is he's seen police like this go to jail in Edmonton for aggravated assault on people. So they're actually already launching something. You can see this Devlin guy calmly speaking, saying he can't bend his legs. When I did the interview with him before Devlin sent me his footage with all the angles, and it breaks down what happens. And the way he was describing it to me, it almost sounded like, well, yeah, of course you're going to have the most complimentary version of your own story. But then the footage completely aligns with everything he said. Like they tase him later on. They're trying to get him to bend over. It's madness. He can't put his legs behind his back. He's saying, I'm not resisting, I'm not complying. And the wild thing, how he wound up shirtless, is he was talking to one cop, trying to confirm, filming as he's an independent journalist, what part of the injunction is being violated here, what exactly is going wrong. And another cop walked up and grabbed the collar of his shirt and his hoodie so aggressively and pulled him over that he ripped all his clothes off. Like the guy wasn't walking around shirtless. They ripped the kid's clothes off. Absolutely insane situation there. It'd be great if that cop was filming the violent arrest taking place in front instead of the people standing by watching.
Yeah. Well, you know what though? There's going to be a ton of body cam footage. A ton. And I'm sure his lawyers will. Well,
they're going to be, once our report comes out today, if they don't drop those charges pretty quick, they've got another thing coming from this kid's lawyer because it's open and shut on the assault thing. It literally could not be more apparent in the footage you're going to see.
I think that's the end of our chats today. Not a ton of chats, but we were also not on Super U. So that might be a reason for that. Efron, unless there are some that have not come through on my side. Okay, that's everything. So I think that's the show for today. We're almost 20 minutes over when the show should have ended. Adam, thanks so much for joining me as I try to figure out how exactly I feel about Will Smith punching Chris Rock. And I'm still not sure how I feel, but I do know that it was not an act of chivalry and Chris Rock has terrible friends. Secondarily, thank you everybody who tuned in. And third, but maybe most importantly, thank you to everybody who pitched in to keep the lights on here at Rebel News. We know you work hard for your money, so we appreciate every little bit that you send our way to help us do the work that we do. Thanks, Efron, Olivia, and all the team in the office and working from home today. You work very hard to let everybody know when we're going live and to get all the nuts and bolts and pieces in place for us. So I think that's it. I've thanked everybody. And as David Menzies always says, stay sane.